When I walked into the bank that Tuesday morning to dispute a suspicious $8,000 charge on my credit card, I never expected to see Marcus behind the manager's desk. The same Marcus who used to help me cram for economics exams in our dorm room. The same Marcus whose eyes widened in recognition as he looked at the transaction history. "Jessica," he said quietly, his professional demeanor shifting. "We need to talk about this charge." I know exactly where this money went. What he told me next would unravel everything I thought I knew about my sister's perfect wedding. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Jessica Chen, and at 28 years old, I thought I had my life figured out. I was a marketing coordinator at Sterling Communications in downtown Portland, Oregon, living in a cozy one-bedroom apartment in the Pearl District that I'd worked 2 jobs to afford. My credit score was pristine, my savings account was growing steadily, and I prided myself on financial responsibility. Growing up as the eldest daughter in a Chinese-American household had taught me the value of hard work and careful planning. What it hadn't prepared me for was dealing with a sister who saw my success as her personal safety net. My younger sister, Melody, had always been the family's golden child. Where I was methodical and cautious, she was spontaneous and charming. Our parents, David and Linda Chen, had immigrated from Taiwan when I was 5, and Melody was 2, carrying with them dreams of success and prosperity for their daughters. They poured everything into building their small import business, Chen's Oriental Treasures, working 16-hour days to establish themselves in a competitive market. The pressure to succeed academically and professionally was immense, but it affected us differently. I channeled it into perfectionism, graduating summa cum laude from Portland State University with a degree in marketing and communications. Melody, however, seemed immune to pressure altogether. She drifted through community college, changing majors 3 times before finally settling on graphic design, a field she claimed would allow her to express her creativity without being constrained by corporate expectations. Our parents' response to our different approaches revealed their deep-seated favoritism. When I brought home perfect report cards, it was expected. When Melody scraped by with C's, it was celebrated as evidence of her artistic temperament. When I landed my first job at Sterling Communications, my parents nodded approvingly but focused the dinner conversation on Melody's latest art project. When Melody decided to drop out of college in her final semester to pursue freelance design work, they supported her decision completely, even offering to help fund her portfolio development. The financial dynamics in our family were complicated by cultural expectations and guilt. As the successful daughter, I was expected to contribute to family expenses and help support Melody's artistic pursuits. This expectation was never stated outright, but was communicated through pointed comments about family loyalty and subtle pressure whenever Melody faced financial difficulties. I found myself regularly transferring money to help with her rent, art supplies, or car repairs, always with promises of repayment that never materialized. My apartment became a refuge from these family dynamics. I had carefully decorated it with modern furniture and minimalist artwork, creating a space that reflected my personal taste rather than family expectations. The open-concept living area featured floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Willamette River, and I had transformed the small balcony into a reading nook with comfortable seating and potted plants. This space represented my independence and financial achievement, a tangible reminder that my hard work had created something beautiful and entirely my own. My social life centered around a small group of close friends from college and work. Unlike the complicated dynamics of my family relationships, these friendships were built on mutual respect and shared interests. My best friend, Amanda Rodriguez, worked as a software developer at a local tech startup. We met during our freshman year at Portland State and bonded over our shared experiences as first-generation college students navigating academic and social pressures our parents couldn't fully understand. Amanda was the one person who truly understood my family situation without judgment. She had witnessed numerous occasions when Melody would call in tears about some financial crisis, and I would immediately offer to help without considering the impact on my own budget. "You're too generous for your own good," Amanda would tell me gently. "There's a difference between helping family and enabling them." Her observations were always delivered with love, but they stung because I knew they were accurate. I had become the family's financial safety net, and Melody had learned to exploit my guilt and sense of responsibility with increasing sophistication. Each crisis seemed more urgent than the last, each request for help accompanied by elaborate explanations about why this time was different, why she would definitely pay me back, why I was the only person who could save her from disaster. The pattern had been established years earlier, but it escalated dramatically when Melody began dating Richard Park 3 years ago. Richard was everything my parents wanted in a son-in-law: handsome, charming, and from a successful Korean-American family that owned several restaurants in the Seattle area. He drove an expensive BMW, wore designer clothes, and spoke confidently about his plans to expand his family's business empire. My parents were immediately smitten with his apparent success and sophistication. What bothered me about Richard wasn't his confidence or ambition, but the subtle ways he seemed to encourage Melody's financial irresponsibility. During family dinners, he would casually mention expensive restaurants they'd tried or weekend trips they were planning, always with the implication that money was no object. When my parents would worry about Melody's financial stability, Richard would wave off their concerns with comments about how he was teaching her to think bigger and not limit herself with small-minded budgeting. I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt, recognizing that my protective instincts toward Melody might be making me overly critical. But I noticed that whenever they went out together, Melody would inevitably call me afterward, asking for money to cover her portion of the expenses. "Richard paid for dinner, but I need to cover my share of the hotel," she would explain. Or, "He got the concert tickets, but I want to pay him back for my half." These requests always came with elaborate justifications about maintaining her independence and not wanting to seem like a gold digger. The engagement happened exactly as I expected it would, dramatically and expensively. Richard proposed during a weekend trip to Napa Valley, presenting Melody with a ring that must have cost more than I made in 6 months. The proposal was documented extensively on social media, with professional quality photos of the moment and the celebration that followed. My parents were beside themselves with joy, already making plans for a wedding that would showcase their daughter's success in landing such a desirable husband. Planning the wedding became Melody's full-time occupation, and by extension, my part-time financial obligation. Every aspect of the celebration had to be perfect, from the designer dress that cost more than my monthly rent, to the destination bachelor and bachelorette parties that required flights and luxury accommodations. Each expense was presented as a once-in-a-lifetime necessity, and each request for financial help was accompanied by detailed explanations about why traditional wedding financing wouldn't work in their situation. Richard's family.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
"Is paying for the reception," Melody explained during one of our coffee dates. "But I need to contribute something significant to show that I'm not just taking advantage of their generosity. The photographer alone is going to cost $8,000. But Jessica, you should see his portfolio. This is going to be the wedding of the century." I found myself caught between my desire to support my sister's happiness and my growing concern about the financial pressure these expectations were creating. Every conversation with Melody revolved around wedding planning, and every family gathering became an opportunity for my parents to hint about how important it was for successful family members to contribute to major celebrations. The guilt was carefully cultivated and expertly applied, leaving me feeling selfish for questioning expenses that seemed designed more for social media impact than genuine celebration. My financial situation, while stable, was not unlimited. I had worked hard to build an emergency fund and was saving for a down payment on a condo, goals that required careful budgeting and disciplined spending. The constant requests for wedding contributions were slowly eroding these savings, but every time I considered setting boundaries, I was reminded of family loyalty and the importance of supporting Melody during this special time in her life. The credit card in question was a premium rewards card I had obtained 2 years earlier to take advantage of travel benefits and cash back on business expenses. I used it primarily for work-related purchases and large expenses that I paid off immediately to avoid interest charges while maximizing rewards points. The credit limit was substantial, reflecting my excellent credit history and stable income, but I had never used more than a small fraction of the available credit. I kept the card information secure, stored in a locked filing cabinet in my home office along with other important financial documents. The physical card rarely left my wallet except for online purchases, and I monitored the account regularly through the bank's mobile app and monthly statements. This careful attention to my credit card activity was what first alerted me to the suspicious charge that would change everything. The charge appeared on a Monday morning as I was reviewing my accounts over coffee before work. $8,000 to Paradise Resorts International, with a transaction date from the previous Friday. The amount was staggering, representing nearly 3 months of my rent, and I had no memory of making any such purchase. My first thought was that the card had been compromised by some sophisticated fraud scheme, and I immediately called the bank's customer service line to report the unauthorized transaction. The customer service representative was helpful, but limited in what information she could provide over the phone. She confirmed that the charge was legitimate, meaning it had been processed with the correct card information and security codes, but she couldn't provide details about where or how the transaction had occurred. She advised me to visit a branch office to speak with a manager who would have access to more detailed transaction records and could initiate a formal investigation. First National Bank's downtown Portland branch was a short walk from my office, so I arranged to meet with a manager during my lunch break on Tuesday. The building was an imposing structure of glass and granite that projected stability and trustworthiness, qualities I desperately needed as I grappled with the possibility that someone had stolen thousands of dollars using my credit card information. The interior was designed with modern elegance, featuring marble floors and contemporary artwork that created an atmosphere of professional competence. I approached the reception desk and explained that I needed to speak with a manager about a disputed credit card charge. The receptionist directed me to a seating area and assured me that someone would be with me shortly. As I waited, I reviewed the limited information I had about the suspicious transaction, trying to piece together any possible explanation for how my card information could have been compromised. When the manager's office door opened and I heard my name called, I looked up to see a familiar face that stopped me in my tracks. Marcus Thompson stood in the doorway, wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit and a professional smile that flickered with recognition as our eyes met. The last time I had seen him was at our college graduation 4 years ago, when we had promised to stay in touch despite heading to different cities for our respective careers. Marcus had been my study partner and close friend throughout our junior and senior years at Portland State. We had spent countless hours in the library working through complex economic theories and mathematical models, and he had helped me navigate the social pressures of college life with wisdom beyond his years. He was one of the few people who understood the pressure I felt to excel academically while managing family expectations, and our friendship had been built on mutual respect and intellectual compatibility. "Jessica Chen," he said, extending his hand with a warm smile that carried hints of our shared history. "I can't believe it's really you. What brings you to First National?" I explained briefly about the disputed charge while he led me into his office, a spacious room with windows overlooking the city and walls decorated with his various professional certifications and awards. As we settled into chairs around a small conference table, I couldn't help but notice how successful he appeared. The boy who had helped me study for finals had clearly thrived in the financial services industry. "Let me pull up your account," Marcus said, his tone shifting to professional mode as he turned to his computer. $8,000 to Paradise Resorts International. That's definitely a significant charge. He paused, studying the screen with a frown that seemed to deepen as he scrolled through additional information. "Marcus, what is it?" I asked, sensing that he was seeing something troubling in the transaction details. He turned the monitor toward me, pointing to specific fields in the transaction record. "Jessica, this charge was made online using your complete card information, including the security code. But what's interesting is the billing address used for verification. It matches your home address exactly, and the transaction was processed from an IP address that traces back to the Portland metro area." The implications of his words hit me like a physical blow. Someone with access to my complete card information and personal details had made this purchase locally. This wasn't a sophisticated international fraud scheme. This was someone who knew me personally and had deliberate access to my private financial information. "There's more," Marcus continued gently, clearly recognizing my distress. "I can see the specific reservation details because Paradise Resorts International uses our processing system for their online bookings. This charge is for a 7-night honeymoon package at their Maui location, booked for last weekend under the names Richard Park and Melody Chen. The world seemed to stop moving as the full scope of the betrayal became clear. My sister had used my credit card to pay for her honeymoon, charging $8,000 without my knowledge or permission for a luxury vacation that I could never have afforded for myself. The violation felt both financial and deeply personal, representing not just theft but a fundamental breach of trust that called into question everything I thought I knew about my relationship with Melody. "I'm so sorry, Jessica," Marcus said quietly, his professional demeanor giving way to genuine concern for an old friend. "I can see how shocked you are. Do you want to take a few minutes before we discuss your options?" I sat in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of what had happened. Melody had not only stolen from me but had used the money to fund the exact kind of extravagant luxury that she knew I would never approve of or be able to afford. The honeymoon that she would undoubtedly describe in glowing terms on social media had been purchased with money taken from my careful savings and responsible financial planning. The betrayal was made worse by the realization that this was not an impulsive mistake, but a calculated theft. She would have needed to access my filing cabinet, photograph or copy my card information, and then deliberately use it to make a purchase she knew I would never authorize. The level of premeditation involved suggested that she viewed my financial resources as her personal safety net, available for her use regardless of my consent or knowledge. "What exactly are my options?" I asked finally, my voice steadier than I felt. Marcus leaned forward, his expression serious but supportive. "Legally, this is credit card fraud, even though it's family. You can file a dispute claiming unauthorized use, which would trigger a formal investigation. The charge would be reversed pending the investigation, and if fraud is confirmed, you wouldn't be responsible for the amount." He paused, clearly recognizing the personal complexity of the situation. "However, I have to tell you that if this goes through the formal fraud investigation process, there could be serious legal consequences for whoever used your card. Credit card fraud of this magnitude is a felony, potentially punishable by significant fines and prison time." The weight of the decision settled over me like a heavy blanket. I could protect myself financially by reporting the fraud, but doing so would potentially destroy my sister's life and marriage before they had even begun. The choice between my financial security and my family's stability felt impossible, but I knew I needed time to think through all the implications before making any irreversible decisions. "Can I have some time to consider my options?" I asked. "Of course," Marcus replied, his tone understanding. "But I should mention that there are time limits on fraud reporting, so you shouldn't wait too long to decide. In the meantime, I can put a temporary hold on the charge to prevent any additional interest or fees from accumulating." As I prepared to leave his office, Marcus handed me his business card with his direct phone number. "Jessica, I want you to know that whatever you decide, I'll make sure you're treated fairly throughout this process. And if you need someone to talk through the situation, with someone who understands both the financial and personal aspects, please don't hesitate to call." Walking back to my office, I felt as though I was moving through a dream. The familiar streets of downtown Portland seemed foreign and surreal, and I struggled to focus on the simple task of putting one foot in front of the other. The betrayal felt like a physical wound, a deep cut that would leave permanent scars regardless of how it healed. The rest of my workday passed in a blur of distracted meetings and half-hearted attempts to focus on routine tasks. My colleagues noticed my unusual distraction but attributed it to the stress of a challenging project deadline. I found myself staring at my computer screen, seeing not the marketing reports that demanded attention but mental images of Melody and Richard lounging on a tropical beach, enjoying luxury accommodations purchased with my stolen money. The drive home that evening gave me time to begin processing the emotional impact of the discovery. The anger was building slowly, a cold fury that felt different from any emotion I had experienced before. This wasn't the frustration of dealing with Melody's usual financial irresponsibility. This was the rage of someone who had been deliberately betrayed by the person they had trusted most completely. My apartment, usually a sanctuary of calm and order, felt different when I walked through the door. I went directly to my home office and opened the filing cabinet where I kept important documents. My credit card information was exactly where I had left it, but now I noticed that the folder seemed slightly disorganized. as though someone had gone through it hastily and tried to restore order, without perfect accuracy. The evidence of Melody's intrusion into my private space added another layer to the violation. She had been in my home, gone through my personal belongings, and stolen information that she knew would allow her to access my financial resources. The systematic nature of the theft suggested planning and deliberation that made her actions feel even more calculated and hurtful. I called Amanda immediately, needing to talk through the situation with someone who would understand the complexity of my emotions without trying to minimize the severity of what had happened. When I explained the discovery and Marcus's role in uncovering the truth, her reaction was immediate and unequivocal. "Jessica, this is theft." "Plain and simple," she said, her voice tight with anger on my behalf. "I don't care that she's your sister. This is a felony, and you need to protect yourself." Her certainty was both comforting and challenging. Part of me wanted someone to give me permission to prioritize my own financial security over family loyalty, but another part of me struggled with the implications of taking legal action against Melody. The potential consequences for her life and marriage seemed disproportionate to the financial damage, even though I intellectually understood that she had made the choice to risk those consequences when she decided to commit fraud. "What if I just demand that she pay me back?" I asked, exploring alternatives to formal fraud reporting. "With what money?" Amanda replied bluntly. "She just spent $8,000 of your money on a honeymoon. Do you really think she has $8,000 lying around to pay you back? And even if she does, what's to stop her from doing this again the next time she wants something she can't afford?" Her questions forced me to confront the likelihood that Melody would never voluntarily repay the money, and might even deny having used my card if confronted directly. The pattern of financial irresponsibility and manipulation that had characterized our relationship for years suggested that she would find ways to justify her actions and shift responsibility for the consequences onto me. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind cycling through possible scenarios and outcomes. I thought about my parents' potential reaction to learning that their golden child had committed credit card fraud against her responsible older sister. I imagined the family gatherings that would be forever changed by this betrayal, the careful balance of relationships that would be disrupted regardless of how I chose to handle the situation. But mostly, I thought about the $8,000 that represented months of careful saving, money that I had set aside for my own future security and independence. The theft didn't just impact my current financial situation, it set back my long-term goals and forced me to reconsider plans that had seemed within reach just days earlier. By morning, I had reached a preliminary decision about how to proceed, but I knew I needed more information before taking any irreversible action. I would confront Melody directly and give her the opportunity to explain her actions and propose a solution. If she was willing to take responsibility and make immediate arrangements to repay the money, I might consider handling the situation privately. But if she denied the theft or refused to accept accountability, I would have no choice but to protect myself through the formal fraud reporting process. The decision felt both reasonable and terrifying, representing a fundamental shift in how I viewed my relationship with my family and my obligations to protect their interests at the expense of my own well-being. For the first time in my life, I was prepared to prioritize my own financial security over the complex web of guilt and loyalty that had governed my family relationships for years. I spent Wednesday morning researching credit card fraud laws and procedures, wanting to understand exactly what I would be setting in motion if I chose to file a formal dispute. The information was sobering. Credit card fraud involving amounts over $5,000 was classified as a felony in Oregon, potentially punishable by up to 5 years in prison and fines up to $100,000. Even first-time offenders faced serious consequences, and the involvement of family relationships would not necessarily mitigate the legal penalties. Armed with this knowledge, I called Melody and arranged to meet her for coffee on Thursday evening. I chose a neutral location, a small cafe in the Alberta Arts District that was far enough from both of our usual haunts to provide privacy for what was certain to be a difficult conversation. As I prepared for the meeting, I practiced different approaches to broaching the subject, trying to find a way to give her the opportunity to confess and take responsibility without immediately putting her on the defensive. The cafe was nearly empty when I arrived, with only a few customers scattered among the mismatched furniture and local artwork that gave the space its bohemian charm. I chose a table in the back corner where we would be able to talk privately and ordered a coffee while I waited for Melody to arrive. My hands shook slightly as I lifted the cup, betraying the nervousness I was trying to conceal beneath a calm exterior. Melody walked in 15 minutes late, looking radiant and relaxed in a way that made my stomach twist with anger. Her skin was golden from tropical sun, and she wore a flowing sundress that screamed expensive resort wear. The happiness radiating from her felt like a personal insult, knowing that it had been purchased with my stolen money. "Jessica, you look so serious," she said, settling into the chair across from me with a bright smile. "I hope you're not going to lecture me about thank you cards. I know I'm behind on sending them, but the honeymoon was so amazing that I haven't wanted to think about anything wedding-related since we got back." Her casual mention of the honeymoon provided the perfect opening for the conversation I had been dreading. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about the honeymoon," I said carefully. "It sounds like it was quite an expensive trip." "Oh my God, Jessica, it was incredible," she gushed, apparently missing the serious tone in my voice. "Richard surprised me with this amazing resort in Maui. 7 nights in an ocean view suite with private butler service and access to this exclusive beach club. I must have taken 1,000 photos." She pulled out her phone and began scrolling through images of pristine beaches, luxury accommodations, and elaborate meals that looked like they belonged in a travel magazine. Each photo felt like evidence of the theft, documenting exactly how my money had been spent without my knowledge or consent. "It must have cost a fortune," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "I know, right?" Richard said not to worry about the cost because it was a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and he's right. "We'll probably never get to stay somewhere that amazing again." She paused, a slight frown crossing her face. Actually, I felt a little guilty about how expensive it was, so I insisted on paying for part of it myself. I used my credit card for about half the cost to make sure I was contributing equally to our honeymoon. The lie was delivered so smoothly and convincingly that I almost doubted my own knowledge of what had happened. But I had seen the transaction details with my own eyes, and I knew that the card she had used was mine, not hers. The casual way she claimed responsibility for the expense, while simultaneously lying about how she had paid for it, revealed a level of deception that felt almost pathological. "Melody," I said slowly, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Did you use my credit card to pay for any part of your honeymoon?" The question hung in the air between us like a bomb waiting to explode. For a moment, Melody's expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker behind her eyes, a quick calculation followed by what looked like panic. When she spoke, her voice was higher than usual, carrying the forced innocence I remembered from childhood when she was caught in obvious lies. "Of course not. Why would you even ask me something like that? I would never use your credit card without permission. That would be stealing." The denial was exactly what I had expected, but hearing it delivered with such apparent sincerity still felt like a physical blow. She was not only refusing to take responsibility for the theft, but was acting offended that I would even suggest such a thing. The performance was convincing enough that someone who didn't know the facts might have believed her completely. "I'm asking because I have an $8,000 charge on my credit card to Paradise Resorts International, dated from last weekend," I said, my voice remaining calm despite the fury building inside me. "The charge was made using my complete card information, including the security code, and the reservation was made under your name and Richard's." The color drained from Melody's face as the specificity of my knowledge became clear. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, apparently realizing that the detailed information I possessed made denial impossible. For a moment, I saw genuine fear in her eyes as she grasped the seriousness of what she had done. "Jessica, I can explain," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Richard and I had planned to pay for the honeymoon ourselves, but there was a mix-up with his credit card, and the resort required immediate payment, or they were going to cancel our reservation." The explanation came tumbling out in a rush of words that seemed designed more to fill silence than to provide actual justification. According to her story, Richard's credit card had been declined due to a banking error, and they had been told that unless payment was received within 24 hours, they would lose their reservation and forfeit the deposit they had already paid. I panicked, she continued, tears beginning to form in her eyes. I knew you would want me to have the perfect honeymoon, and I thought I could replace the money before you noticed the charge. Richard is getting a bonus next month that would cover the entire amount, and I figured I could pay you back before your credit card statement even arrived. The story was plausible enough to create doubt, but it failed to address the fundamental violation of trust that had occurred. Even if every detail of her explanation was true, she had still made the conscious decision to steal my credit card information and use it without permission. The theft was not an accident or misunderstanding. It was a deliberate choice to prioritize her convenience over my financial security. Melody, even if everything you're saying is true, you still committed credit card fraud, I said, my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside me. You took my credit card information and used it to make an $8,000 purchase without my knowledge or consent. That's a felony. The word felony seemed to hit her like a physical blow. Her tears became more pronounced, and her hands began to shake as the full implications of her actions became clear. I felt no satisfaction in her distress, only a deep sadness about the situation she had created through her choices. Please, Jessica, you can't report this to the police, she pleaded, her voice breaking. It would ruin my marriage, my career, everything. Richard doesn't even know I used your card. I told him I had savings that I used to cover my share of the expenses. This admission added another layer of deception to an already complex situation. Not only had she stolen from me, but she had lied to her new husband about having the financial resources to contribute to their honeymoon expenses. The web of lies she had created was growing more complicated with each revelation. What exactly do you expect me to do? I asked. I'm out $8,000 that I worked hard to save. I have goals and plans that are now set back because of your decision to steal from me. I'll pay you back, she said desperately. Every penny, with interest. Just give me time to figure out how to get the money without Richard finding out what I did. Her promise to repay the money felt hollow, given her history of financial irresponsibility and broken commitments. I had heard similar promises countless times over the years, always delivered with convincing sincerity, and always ultimately broken when the reality of her financial situation made repayment impossible. How? I asked bluntly. You don't have a steady job, you have no savings, and you just admitted that you lied to your husband about having money. Where exactly is this repayment going to come from? She had no answer to this question, which confirmed my suspicion that her promise to repay was more about avoiding consequences than creating a realistic plan for making things right. The conversation continued for another hour, with Melody cycling through various emotional appeals and desperate promises, but she never addressed the fundamental issue of accountability for her actions. As I drove home that evening, I felt a strange sense of clarity about what needed to happen next. Melody had been given the opportunity to take responsibility and propose a realistic solution, and she had instead chosen to lie, manipulate, and make promises she couldn't keep. The decision about how to proceed was no longer about family loyalty or forgiveness. It was about protecting myself from someone who had proven she would steal from me without hesitation or remorse. I called Marcus the next morning and arranged to meet with him again that afternoon to begin the formal fraud dispute process. The decision felt both liberating and terrifying, representing a fundamental shift in how I viewed my relationship with my family and my obligations to protect their interests at the expense of my own well-being. The meeting with Marcus that Friday afternoon felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unfold in slow motion. His office felt different this time, less welcoming and more clinical, as we shifted from personal reconnection to serious financial crime investigation. The afternoon light streaming through his windows cast long shadows across the conference table, where he had laid out the formal dispute paperwork, each document representing another step toward a confrontation I still wasn't sure I was ready for. Before we begin the official process, I want to make sure you understand exactly what you're setting in motion, Marcus said, his tone carefully professional but tinged with concern for our shared history. Once I file this fraud report, it triggers an automatic investigation that I can't stop or control. The credit card company will reverse the charge temporarily, but they'll also flag the case for potential criminal prosecution. I nodded, trying to project confidence I didn't entirely feel. The weight of the decision pressed down on me like a physical force, but Melody's reaction during our coffee shop confrontation had made it clear that she had no intention of taking genuine responsibility for her actions. Her tears and promises had felt performative rather than authentic, designed to manipulate my emotions rather than address the fundamental violation of trust that had occurred. "What happens to the investigation if new evidence comes to light?" I asked, thinking about the lies Melody had told Richard about having savings to cover the honeymoon expenses. Marcus pulled up the relevant policies on his computer screen, scrolling through dense legal text as he explained the process. "The investigation team will examine all available evidence, including transaction records, IP address logs, and any witness statements. If they determine that fraud occurred, they're required to report it to local law enforcement. At that point, it becomes a criminal matter that's out of our hands entirely." The finality of his words settled over me like a cold blanket. Once this process began, Melody's fate would be determined by investigators and prosecutors who had no knowledge of our family history or the complex emotions involved in the situation. The sister who had once helped me build blanket forts in our childhood bedroom could potentially face years in prison because of choices she had made as an adult. "I need to ask you something personal," I said, looking directly at Marcus. "Are you required to report this immediately? Or do I have time to try one more approach with my family?" His expression softened slightly as he leaned back in his chair, clearly weighing professional obligations against personal understanding. "Technically, once you sign these documents, I have to file the report within 24 hours. But if you wanted to have one final conversation before signing, that would be entirely within your rights as the cardholder." The reprieve felt like a gift, even though I wasn't sure how I would use the additional time. Part of me hoped that Melody might surprise me by voluntarily confessing to Richard and our parents, taking full responsibility for her actions, and proposing a realistic repayment plan. But a larger part of me recognized that such an outcome was unlikely, given everything I knew about her character and her history of avoiding accountability for difficult situations. "Give me until Monday morning," I requested. "If I haven't heard from you by 10 o'clock, proceed with filing the report." Marcus agreed to the delay, but his expression made it clear that he thought I was prolonging an inevitable outcome. As I gathered my purse and prepared to leave his office, he handed me a business card for a financial counselor who specialized in helping fraud victims understand their options and rights. "Jessica, I hope you know that whatever happens, you're making the right choice by protecting yourself," he said as I reached the door. "Family relationships are complicated, but theft is theft, regardless of the relationship between the people involved." The weekend that followed was the longest of my life. I found myself unable to concentrate on routine activities, constantly checking my phone for calls or messages from Melody that never came. Amanda invited me to join her for a hiking trip in the Columbia River Gorge, hoping that physical activity and natural beauty might provide some distraction from the emotional turmoil I was experiencing. The hike was challenging, a steep trail that wound through old-growth forest before emerging onto a rocky outcrop with panoramic views of the river and surrounding mountains. The physical exertion felt good, providing a temporary escape from the endless mental loops about family loyalty, financial responsibility, and the potential consequences of the choices I was facing. "You know what strikes me about this whole situation?" Amanda said as we sat on a fallen log sharing water and trail mix. "Melody put you in an impossible position. She made choices that forced you to choose between protecting yourself and protecting her, and now she's trying to make you feel guilty for choosing yourself." Her observation cut to the heart of something I had been struggling to articulate. The manipulation involved in Melody's actions extended beyond the simple theft of money. She had deliberately created a situation where any response I chose would cause pain to someone I cared about. By stealing from me and then lying about it, she had forced me into the role of either victim or villain, with no option that preserved both my financial security and our family relationships. "I keep thinking about what our grandmother would have said about this," I admitted, remembering the woman who had immigrated to America with nothing but determination and an unshakable moral compass. "She always told us that family loyalty was important, but she also believed that people had to face the consequences of their choices. Amanda nodded thoughtfully, picking up a smooth river stone and turning it over in her hands. Maybe the most loyal thing you can do for Melody is to stop enabling her destructive behavior. She's never going to learn to make better choices if she knows you'll always bail her out, no matter what she does. The wisdom in her words resonated deeply, but implementing that wisdom felt monumentally difficult. I had been conditioned from childhood to prioritize family harmony over personal boundaries, to sacrifice my own needs whenever they conflicted with Melody's wants or our parents' expectations. Breaking that pattern would require not just courage, but a fundamental shift in how I understood my role within our family system. Saturday evening brought an unexpected phone call from my mother, her voice tight with worry as she explained that Melody had seemed distressed all week, but refused to discuss what was troubling her. According to my mother, Melody had been crying frequently, and had even mentioned feeling guilty about something she couldn't talk about, behavior that was highly unusual for someone who typically shared every detail of her emotional life with our parents. She mentioned having coffee with you earlier this week, my mother said, her tone carefully neutral but loaded with implication. Did you two have some kind of disagreement? She's been acting so strange since then, and Richard is starting to worry that something serious is wrong. The irony of the situation was almost laughable. Melody was experiencing guilt and distress because she had been confronted with the reality of her actions, but rather than using those feelings as motivation to take responsibility and make things right, she was allowing our mother to worry and creating additional stress for her new husband. Even in the face of consequences, she was finding ways to position herself as the victim, rather than acknowledging the harm she had caused. We did have a difficult conversation, I admitted carefully, unwilling to lie but also not ready to reveal the full scope of what had happened. Melody made some choices that affected me financially, and we're working through how to handle the situation. My deliberately vague explanation seemed to satisfy my mother's immediate curiosity, but I could hear the concern in her voice as she pressed for more details. Is this something that Richard should know about? Melody seems to think that telling him would make things worse, but he's her husband now. Shouldn't he be involved in resolving whatever is wrong? The question highlighted one of the most troubling aspects of Melody's approach to the situation. By lying to Richard about having savings to cover her share of the honeymoon expenses, she had built their marriage on a foundation of deception. Her reluctance to involve him in resolving the theft suggested that she was more concerned with maintaining her fabricated image than with honestly addressing the problem she had created. That's really something Melody needs to decide for herself, I said diplomatically, though privately I believed Richard had a right to know that his wife had committed a serious crime and was facing potential criminal charges. I think honesty is usually the best policy in marriage, but it's not my place to make those decisions for her. The conversation with my mother left me feeling even more isolated and conflicted about the situation. She was clearly worried about Melody, but had no understanding of the severity of what had actually happened. If I proceeded with the fraud report, my parents would be blindsided by news that their golden child was facing felony charges, and they would undoubtedly blame me for failing to handle the situation privately within the family. Sunday morning brought a text message from Melody that consisted of a single word: please. The brevity of the message somehow made it more powerful than all her elaborate explanations and emotional appeals from our coffee shop meeting. I stared at the word for several minutes, feeling the weight of everything it represented: desperation, fear, regret, and a last-ditch attempt to avoid the consequences of her actions. I crafted several different responses, ranging from angry confrontations to detailed explanations of why I felt I had no choice but to protect myself. But ultimately, I deleted them all and sent back a single sentence: "You know what you need to do." The message was both a challenge and an invitation, offering her one final opportunity to surprise me by taking responsibility for her choices. Her response came an hour later. "I can't tell Richard. It would destroy everything. Please don't destroy my marriage over money." The characterization of the situation as being about money rather than trust and integrity revealed how fundamentally she misunderstood what had happened. This wasn't a simple financial dispute between sisters. It was a serious crime that had damaged our relationship in ways that might never be fully repaired. Her continued focus on avoiding consequences rather than accepting responsibility confirmed that she hadn't learned anything from our confrontation. Monday morning arrived with gray skies and persistent drizzle, weather that matched my emotional state as I prepared for what would likely be the final chapter in my relationship with Melody as I had known it. I dressed carefully for work, choosing a professional but comfortable outfit that would carry me through what promised to be a difficult day of meetings and phone calls. My phone remained silent throughout the morning, with no messages from Melody or other family members. By 9:30, I had accepted that she was not going to surprise me with a confession or genuine attempt to make things right. At exactly 10 o'clock, I called Marcus and gave him permission to proceed with filing the fraud report. "I'll submit the paperwork this morning," he said, his tone sympathetic but businesslike. "You should receive confirmation from the credit card company within 24 hours, and the temporary credit should appear on your account within 3 business days. The investigation will take several weeks to complete, but the criminal referral will happen automatically if they confirm fraud occurred." The relief I felt after making the call was unexpected and profound. For weeks, I had been carrying the weight of this secret knowledge, trying to decide how to handle a situation that had no good solutions. By finally taking action to protect myself, I felt like I had reclaimed some measure of control over my own life and financial security. The credit card company called that afternoon to confirm receipt of the fraud report and to walk me through the next steps in the investigation process. The customer service representative was professional and efficient, explaining that they would be contacting Paradise Resorts International to verify the transaction details and gathering additional evidence about how my card information had been obtained and used. In cases involving family members, we're required to proceed with the same investigation protocols as any other fraud case, the representative explained. The relationship between the cardholder and the person who used the card doesn't affect our legal obligations to investigate and report suspected criminal activity. Her words reinforced Marcus's earlier warnings about the automatic nature of the process I had set in motion. Once the investigation confirmed what I already knew to be true, Melody would be facing criminal charges regardless of any personal appeals or family pressure to handle the situation privately. Tuesday brought the first sign that the investigation was moving forward. I received a call from a detective with the Portland Police Bureau's Financial Crimes Unit, asking to schedule an interview about the suspected credit card fraud. Detective Sarah Martinez sounded professional but approachable as she explained that they had received a referral from the credit card company and needed to gather additional information about the circumstances of the case. "I understand this involves a family member, which I know makes the situation more complicated emotionally," she said during our phone conversation. "But I want you to know that we take financial crimes seriously, regardless of the relationships involved. Credit card fraud affects not just individual victims but the entire financial system that honest people depend on." We scheduled the interview for Thursday afternoon at the police station downtown, a meeting that would formalize my role as a victim in a criminal investigation of my own sister. The detective explained that she would need me to provide detailed information about how Melody could have accessed my credit card information and any prior knowledge I might have had about her financial situation or history of similar behavior. The weight of that upcoming interview pressed on me throughout Tuesday and Wednesday, making it difficult to focus on work responsibilities or maintain normal social interactions. I found myself rehearsing potential answers to questions about family dynamics and prior incidents of financial manipulation, trying to present the facts objectively while acknowledging the emotional complexity of the situation. Wednesday evening brought an unexpected visitor to my apartment. I was preparing dinner when the building's intercom buzzed, and I was shocked to hear Richard's voice asking to speak with me. I had been wondering when he would learn about the situation and how he would react to discovering that his new wife had committed a serious crime using stolen credit card information. "Please, Jessica, I just need 5 minutes," he said through the intercom, his voice strained in a way I had never heard before. "I found out what happened, and I need to talk to you about it." I buzzed him up to my apartment, curious about what Melody had told him and whether she had finally decided to tell the truth about the theft. When I opened my door, Richard looked like he hadn't slept in days. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his expensive clothes wrinkled and his hair uncombed in a way that suggested genuine distress rather than calculated performance. "She told me everything," he said without preamble as he stepped into my living room. About using your credit card, about lying to me about having savings, about the fraud investigation. Jessica, I had no idea what she had done. If I had known, I would never have let her pay for any part of that trip. His obvious shock and dismay provided some reassurance that he had been genuinely deceived by Melody's lies rather than complicit in her theft. But his presence in my apartment also created a new complication in an already complex situation. As Melody's husband, he had legal and personal interests that might conflict with my need to protect myself from further financial harm. I came here to apologize and to ask what I can do to make this right, he continued, settling heavily into one of my living room chairs. I brought my checkbook. I can write you a check right now for the full $8,000, plus interest and any fees you've incurred. I just need you to tell me how to stop this investigation before it destroys Melody's life. The offer was tempting, representing immediate financial restitution without the uncertainty and emotional difficulty of a prolonged criminal investigation. But it also raised practical and ethical questions about whether accepting repayment would constitute interference with an ongoing investigation, or could be interpreted as some form of extortion or bribery. Richard, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure it's that simple, I said carefully. The investigation is already underway, and I have an interview scheduled with a detective on Thursday. I don't think I can just call them and say, never mind, because someone wrote me a check. His face fell as the implications of my words sank in. So even if I pay you back immediately, Melody could still face criminal charges? I nodded reluctantly, feeling bad for him despite my anger toward Melody. The fraud report has already been filed, and the police are treating this as a criminal matter. Repayment might influence sentencing if she's convicted, but it probably won't stop the prosecution entirely. Richard buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with what looked like suppressed sobs. This is going to ruin everything, her career, our marriage, our plans for the future. How could she have been so stupid? How could she have risked everything for a vacation that we could have paid for ourselves if she had just been honest about her financial situation? His questions echoed my own thoughts about Melody's decision-making process. The theft had been completely unnecessary if she had simply been honest with Richard about not having savings to contribute to the honeymoon expenses. His family's wealth meant that he could easily have covered the entire cost without creating financial hardship for anyone. Did she explain why she felt like she needed to steal from me instead of just asking you to pay for the whole trip? I asked, genuinely curious about her reasoning. Richard looked up from his hands, his expression a mixture of embarrassment and frustration. She said she wanted to prove that she could contribute equally to our relationship, that she didn't want my family to think she was just marrying me for money. But, Jessica, I would rather have my family think she was a gold digger than have everyone know she's a thief. His words revealed the tragic irony of Melody's choices. In her attempt to project financial independence and avoid appearing to take advantage of Richard's wealth, she had committed a crime that would likely end up costing him far more than simply paying for an expensive honeymoon would have. Her pride and dishonesty had created exactly the kind of scandal and legal problems that would damage both their reputations and their marriage. I know this doesn't fix anything, but I want you to know that I'm going to make sure she gets the best legal representation possible, Richard said as he prepared to leave my apartment. And regardless of what happens with the criminal case, I'm still going to pay you back every penny she stole. It's the least I can do. His commitment to financial restitution was reassuring, but it didn't address the larger issues of trust and family relationships that had been damaged by Melody's actions. Even if I recovered the stolen money, the knowledge that my sister was capable of such betrayal would forever change how I viewed our relationship and my role within our family. Thursday's interview with Detective Martinez was both easier and more difficult than I had anticipated. The police station was a modern building with institutional architecture that projected authority and efficiency, qualities that felt reassuring as I prepared to formalize my complaint against my sister. The detective was professional and thorough, asking detailed questions about the timeline of events and the evidence I had discovered about the theft. Based on what you've told me and the documentation from the bank, this appears to be a straightforward case of credit card fraud, Detective Martinez said as she reviewed her notes. The fact that the perpetrator is your sister makes it emotionally complicated, but it doesn't change the legal reality of what occurred. She explained that the investigation would proceed through standard channels, with charges likely to be filed within the next few weeks. Melody would be arrested and booked, then released pending trial unless the prosecutor considered her a flight risk. The charges would include credit card fraud, identity theft, and potentially computer crimes related to the online nature of the transaction. I want you to understand that once we file charges, this becomes a matter between the state and your sister, the detective continued. Your feelings about prosecution won't influence whether we move forward with the case. The decision to press charges belongs to the prosecutor's office, not to you. This clarification was both relieving and concerning. It meant that I wouldn't have to make the impossible choice between seeking justice and protecting my family, but it also meant that I would have no control over the severity of the punishment Melody might face. The legal system would proceed according to its own logic, regardless of the personal relationships and family dynamics involved. The interview concluded with Detective Martinez explaining that I would likely be called to testify if the case went to trial, and that I should expect some media attention given the unusual nature of a credit card fraud case involving sisters. She provided me with information about victim services and support resources, acknowledging that prosecution of a family member created unique emotional challenges that weren't addressed by standard victim assistance programs. Walking out of the police station, I felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. The formal complaint had been filed, and the legal process would now proceed according to established procedures rather than family politics and emotional manipulation. But I also knew that I had crossed a line that would fundamentally alter my relationships with Melody, my parents, and potentially other family members who might view my actions as betrayal rather than self-protection. The arrest happened the following Tuesday morning. I learned about it through a phone call from my mother, her voice shrill with panic as she explained that police had come to Melody and Richard's apartment with a warrant. According to my mother, Melody had been taken away in handcuffs while neighbors watched from their windows, creating exactly the kind of public humiliation that she had always feared most. "How could you do this to your own sister?" my mother demanded, her voice breaking with emotion. "She made a mistake, but did you really have to involve the police? Couldn't we have handled this as a family?" The accusation stung because it echoed my own doubts about whether I had made the right choice. But I also recognized the familiar pattern of family dynamics that had enabled Melody's destructive behavior for years. Even now, facing the reality of criminal charges and arrest, my mother was more focused on protecting Melody from consequences than on acknowledging the seriousness of what she had done. "Mom, she stole $8,000 from me," I said, trying to keep my voice calm despite the emotions churning inside me. "That's not a mistake, that's a felony." And I gave her multiple opportunities to take responsibility and try to make things right before I filed the fraud report. My mother's response revealed how completely she had absorbed Melody's version of events, which apparently focused on financial desperation and family betrayal rather than theft and deception. According to Melody's narrative, she had been forced to use my credit card because of circumstances beyond her control, and my decision to involve law enforcement was disproportionate and vindictive. "She's pregnant," my mother said, delivering this information like a trump card that should end all discussion of consequences or accountability. "Did you know that when you decided to have her arrested, your sister is going to have a baby, and now she might go to prison because you couldn't forgive a simple mistake?" The pregnancy news hit me like a physical blow, adding another layer of complexity to an already impossible situation. If Melody was convicted and sentenced to prison time, she would potentially give birth while incarcerated, or be separated from her newborn child. The baby, completely innocent in all of this, would suffer consequences for choices made by parents who had prioritized their own desires over legal and ethical boundaries. But the pregnancy also raised questions about Melody's timeline and decision-making that made her actions seem even more irresponsible. If she had known she was pregnant when she stole my credit card information, she had committed a felony while knowing that imprisonment could affect not just her own life but also her unborn child's welfare. "When did she find out about the pregnancy?" I asked, dreading the answer. My mother's hesitation before responding told me everything I needed to know. She took the test the week before the wedding. She and Richard decided to keep it secret until after the honeymoon so it wouldn't overshadow their special day. The revelation that Melody had known about her pregnancy when she stole from me fundamentally changed how I viewed her actions. She hadn't been making impulsive bad decisions under stress. She had been knowingly risking her child's future for the sake of maintaining appearances and avoiding honest conversations with her husband about their financial situation. Mom, if she knew she was pregnant when she used my credit card, that makes her actions even worse, not better, I said, struggling to maintain composure in the face of such willful blindness to moral responsibility. She knowingly committed a felony that could result in prison time when she was responsible for an unborn child. That's not something I did to her. That's something she chose to risk. The conversation devolved from there, with my mother cycling through various emotional appeals and guilt-inducing arguments designed to convince me to somehow undo the legal process I had set in motion. She suggested that I could refuse to cooperate with the prosecution, that I could claim I had given Melody permission to use my card, that I could lie to protect my sister from the consequences of her own choices. Each suggestion revealed how completely my mother was willing to abandon ethical principles to protect Melody from accountability. The same woman who had raised me to value honesty and integrity was now asking me to commit perjury to shield her golden child from justice. The moral inversion was staggering and confirmed that I had made the right choice in refusing to handle this situation privately within our dysfunctional family system. The call ended with my mother's threat to cut off contact with me entirely if I proceeded with cooperating in Melody's prosecution. "You'll have to choose," she said, her voice cold with finality. "Your sister and your family, or this vindictive pursuit of revenge. But you can't have both." The ultimatum was painful but not entirely unexpected. I had known from the beginning that protecting myself financially would likely cost me relationships with family members who prioritized unity over accountability. The choice my mother was demanding wasn't really about revenge versus forgiveness. It was about whether I would continue to enable destructive behavior or finally insist on reasonable boundaries and consequences. After ending the call with my mother, I sat in my apartment feeling emotionally drained, but also strangely liberated. The worst-case scenario I had been dreading had finally materialized. My family had chosen to protect Melody rather than acknowledge the legitimacy of my position, and I was now facing the prospect of complete estrangement from my parents and potentially other relatives who shared their perspective. But I had also discovered that I could survive this outcome. The fear of family disapproval and rejection had controlled my decisions for years, leading me to accept financial exploitation and emotional manipulation in order to maintain relationships that were fundamentally unhealthy. By finally prioritizing my own well-being over family harmony, I had broken free from a cycle of dysfunction that had limited my growth and self-respect for too long. The media attention that Detective Martinez had warned me about materialized 2 days after Melody's arrest, when a local news station ran a story about the unusual case of sisters involved in credit card fraud. The report was brief and didn't identify me by name, but it included enough details about the circumstances to make identification possible for anyone who knew our family situation. The story prompted calls from reporters seeking additional information and quotes about the case, all of which I declined to provide. I had no interest in turning my personal trauma into public entertainment or in providing fodder for speculation about family dynamics and motives. The legal system would determine Melody's fate based on evidence and established procedures, and media coverage would only complicate an already difficult situation. Richard called that evening to apologize for the news coverage and to update me on Melody's condition following her arrest and booking. According to him, she had been released on bail but was struggling emotionally with the reality of facing serious criminal charges. Her pregnancy was progressing normally, but the stress of the legal situation was affecting her physical and mental health in ways that concerned everyone involved. "I want you to know that I don't blame you for any of this," Richard said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Melody made her choices, and now we all have to live with the consequences. I just hope that someday, when this is all over, you might be able to forgive her and maybe have some kind of relationship with your niece or nephew." His words touched me because they acknowledged both the legitimacy of my position and the genuine tragedy of the situation for everyone involved. Unlike my parents, Richard seemed to understand that I had been placed in an impossible position by Melody's actions, and that my decision to protect myself legally was reasonable given the circumstances. I hope so too, I replied honestly. I never wanted any of this to happen. I just wanted her to take responsibility and try to make things right. The baby is innocent in all of this, and I would never want to punish a child for their parents' mistakes. The conversation with Richard left me feeling hopeful that not all family relationships would be permanently damaged by this situation. His ability to see past the immediate crisis to acknowledge the complexity of the moral and legal issues involved suggested that reconciliation might be possible eventually, even if it would require time and significant changes in how our family addressed conflict and accountability. The legal process moved forward with bureaucratic efficiency over the following weeks. Melody was formally charged with credit card fraud, identity theft, and computer crimes, charges that carried potential sentences ranging from probation to several years in prison. Her attorney, an expensive criminal defense lawyer that Richard had hired, began building a case that emphasized her lack of prior criminal history, her pregnancy, and the family relationship that had made the crime possible. I received regular updates from the prosecutor's office about scheduling and procedural matters, but I was not involved in plea negotiations or sentencing discussions. The case would proceed according to legal standards rather than personal preferences, an approach that felt both fair and impersonal given the intimate nature of the relationships involved. The most difficult aspect of the ongoing legal process was the continued isolation from my parents and other family members who had chosen to support Melody rather than acknowledge the legitimacy of my position. Holiday celebrations and family gatherings proceeded without me, and I learned about major family events through social media posts rather than direct communication. But this isolation also created space for me to build stronger relationships with friends who supported my decision and understood the importance of maintaining boundaries with people who exploited trust and violated basic ethical principles. Amanda remained a constant source of support and perspective, helping me navigate the emotional challenges of family estrangement while building a life that reflected my own values rather than others' expectations. The resolution, when it finally came, was both anticlimactic and transformative, in ways I hadn't anticipated. Melody's attorney negotiated a plea agreement that involved restitution, community service, and probation rather than prison time, acknowledging both the seriousness of her crimes and the mitigating factors of her pregnancy and lack of criminal history. The financial restitution was paid immediately by Richard, fulfilling his promise to make me whole regardless of the legal outcome. But the more important resolution was personal rather than legal. The experience of standing up for myself against family pressure and social expectations had fundamentally changed how I understood my own worth and my right to be treated with respect and honesty. I had learned that family loyalty without accountability was not love but enablement, and that protecting myself from exploitation was not selfishness but necessary self-respect. The courtroom was smaller than I had expected, with fluorescent lighting that cast everything in harsh, institutional tones. I sat in the gallery behind the prosecutor's table, watching as Melody entered with her attorney for the sentencing hearing. She was visibly pregnant now, her condition evident beneath the conservative dress. Her lawyer had obviously chosen to evoke sympathy from the judge. She didn't look in my direction, keeping her eyes focused straight ahead as she took her seat at the defendant's table. Judge Patricia Chen, whose shared surname felt like an odd coincidence, reviewed the case file with methodical precision. The irony wasn't lost on me that a judge with our family name would be determining my sister's fate, though I knew it was purely coincidental. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of authority tempered by human understanding of the complex family dynamics that had brought us to this moment. Ms. Chen, the judge addressed Melody directly. You have pleaded guilty to charges of credit card fraud and identity theft. Before I impose sentence, I want to understand what led you to make these choices. This wasn't a crime of desperation or poverty. You stole from your own sister to fund a luxury vacation that you could have afforded through legitimate means. Melody's response was barely audible, her voice trembling as she acknowledged her guilt and expressed remorse for her actions. She spoke about the pressure she felt to contribute financially to her marriage, her fear of appearing dependent on Richard's wealth, and her panic when faced with immediate payment deadlines for their honeymoon reservations. The explanation felt rehearsed but sincere, crafted by her attorney to emphasize emotional rather than criminal motivations. The prosecutor presented a straightforward case for consequences, emphasizing that credit card fraud undermined the financial systems that honest citizens depended on for security and commerce. She acknowledged the family relationship, but argued that personal connections could not excuse criminal behavior or eliminate the need for accountability and deterrence. Her presentation was professional and dispassionate, treating this as a legal matter rather than a family drama. Richard took the stand as a character witness, his testimony revealing the full extent of how Melody's lies had damaged their marriage from its very beginning. He spoke about discovering that the woman he had married was capable of theft and deception, about the counseling they were attending to rebuild trust, and about his commitment to their unborn child despite the challenges they faced. His pain was evident, and I felt genuine sympathy for him despite everything that had happened. When Judge Chen announced the sentence, it reflected both the seriousness of the crimes and the mitigating circumstances of Melody's situation. 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, mandatory financial counseling, and complete restitution of the stolen funds. No jail time, acknowledging her pregnancy and first offender status, but significant enough consequences to demonstrate that actions have lasting repercussions. The restitution had already been paid by Richard, fulfilling his promise to make me financially whole, regardless of the legal outcome. But more importantly, the formal acknowledgement of wrongdoing and the court-ordered consequences provided a sense of closure that private family negotiations never could have achieved. The legal system had validated my position and established clear boundaries around acceptable behavior. As we left the courthouse, I found myself walking behind Melody and Richard toward the parking garage. She turned suddenly, her eyes meeting mine for the first time since the whole ordeal began. Her face was streaked with tears, but there was something different in her expression, a recognition of responsibility that had been absent during our earlier confrontations. "Jessica," she said quietly, Richard's supporting hand on her shoulder, "I know you probably can't forgive me, and I understand why. But I want you to know that I finally understand what I did to you, and to our family, and to my marriage. I'm going to do better. For my baby, and for Richard, and maybe someday for you too." I nodded, feeling a complex mixture of sadness and hope. The sister who had stolen from me was gone, replaced by someone who finally understood the weight of consequences and the importance of honest relationships. Whether we could rebuild any kind of connection remained to be seen, but for the first time, I believed she was capable of genuine change. The months that followed brought unexpected developments in my family relationships. My parents, initially devastated by the criminal proceedings and convinced I had overreacted, gradually began to understand the broader patterns of enabling behavior that had contributed to Melody's choices. The court-ordered family counseling that was part of her sentence included sessions that helped them recognize how their favoritism and rescue behaviors had prevented her from developing genuine accountability and resilience. My father was the first to reach out, calling 6 months after the sentencing to apologize for not supporting me during the crisis. His voice was heavy with regret as he acknowledged that their immediate reaction had been to protect Melody rather than recognize the legitimate harm she had caused. He spoke about the counseling sessions and how they had helped him understand that true family loyalty required holding people accountable for their actions rather than shielding them from consequences. My mother's reconciliation took longer and was more tentative, but eventually came through the birth of Melody's daughter. When little Emma was born healthy and beautiful, my mother called to share the news and to express her hope that the baby might provide an opportunity for our family to heal and move forward with better understanding of boundaries and respect. I visited the hospital 2 days after Emma's birth, bringing a carefully chosen gift and genuine hopes for my niece's future. Melody looked exhausted but peaceful, holding her daughter with the kind of protective tenderness that suggested motherhood might indeed inspire the personal growth she had promised. Richard was attentive and loving, their relationship clearly strengthened by working through the crisis together with professional help. The conversation was awkward at first, filled with careful politeness and unspoken acknowledgments of everything that had happened between us. But as I held Emma and watched her tiny fingers curl around mine, I felt something shift in my relationship with Melody. The love I had always felt for my sister was still there, changed but not destroyed by the betrayal we had both survived. "She's beautiful," I told Melody honestly, marveling at the perfect little person who represented hope and new beginnings for our entire family. "I want to be the kind of mother she can be proud of," Melody replied, her voice steady with conviction I had never heard before. "I want to teach her about honesty and responsibility and taking care of the people who love you. I want to be better than I was." The journey toward rebuilding our relationship has been gradual and sometimes difficult, requiring ongoing conversations about boundaries, expectations, and the changes we both needed to make. But it has also been healing in ways I didn't expect, allowing us to develop an adult relationship based on mutual respect, rather than childhood patterns of competition and manipulation. Today, 3 years later, I can say that standing up for myself was the most difficult and most important decision I ever made. It cost me temporary relationships but gained me permanent self-respect. It created short-term family conflict, but established long-term boundaries that have made all our relationships healthier and more honest. Most importantly, it taught me that protecting yourself from exploitation isn't selfish but necessary, and that real love requires accountability as well as forgiveness. Melody completed her probation successfully and has built a small but thriving graphic design business that allows her to contribute meaningfully to her family's financial security. She pays her own bills, manages her own responsibilities, and has never again asked me for money or borrowed anything without permission. Richard has told me privately that their marriage is stronger now than it was before the crisis, built on honesty rather than pretense. My relationship with Marcus has also evolved in unexpected ways. Our reconnection through this difficult situation led to renewed friendship and eventually to dating. His support during the legal process showed me what it felt like to have someone in my corner who valued justice and integrity as much as I did. We're taking things slowly, building something real based on shared values and genuine compatibility. Emma is now a delightful toddler who calls me Aunt Jess and fills family gatherings with laughter and innocent joy. She represents the possibility of breaking generational cycles of dysfunction and raising children with healthy boundaries and honest relationships. Watching Melody parent her with patience and consistency gives me hope that the lessons learned through our crisis have created lasting positive changes. The financial independence I fought so hard to protect has allowed me to take risks and pursue opportunities that have advanced my career significantly. I was promoted to senior marketing manager last year and am currently saving for a house of my own, goals that feel achievable because I learned to prioritize my own financial security over others' expectations and demands. Sometimes people ask me if I regret involving law enforcement in a family matter, if I think there might have been another way to handle the situation that would have preserved relationships while still addressing the theft. But I've learned that some violations of trust are so fundamental that they require external intervention to resolve properly. Family loyalty without accountability isn't love, it's enabling behavior that ultimately hurts everyone involved. The story of my sister's betrayal and the legal consequences that followed has become a cautionary tale in our extended family and social circle, a reminder that actions have consequences regardless of relationships or good intentions. But it's also become a story of redemption and growth, proof that people can change when they're finally held accountable for their choices and supported in making better ones. If I had to offer advice to anyone facing similar situations of family exploitation or betrayal, it would be this: trust your instincts, protect your boundaries, and don't sacrifice your own well-being to maintain relationships with people who refuse to treat you with basic respect and honesty. Real family will support your right to be treated fairly. Anyone who asks you to accept abuse or exploitation for the sake of family harmony isn't acting in your best interests. The credit card that started this whole ordeal has been replaced with a new account that only I have access to, stored securely and monitored carefully. But more importantly, the experience taught me to guard not just my financial information but my emotional boundaries as well. I've learned to say no without guilt, to expect honesty in my relationships, and to believe that I deserve to be treated with the same respect and consideration that I offer others. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.